I'm Laura McNamara at the 2026 Commodity Classic in San Antonio, Texas. At the American Coalition for Ethanol booth, and joining me is Ron Lamberty. Would you like to introduce yourself for us, please?
Ron Lamberty, I'm the Senior Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer for the American Coalition for Ethanol.
Great. And right now, what is the main message you're hoping to share with anybody that stops by today?
Well, part of it is just making sure they understand. Some of them are members of our organization. Make sure that they're up to date on what we're talking about. One of the things we're pushing here right now is the fly-in that we're having, where we get people from all walks of life to come to D.C. and talk about things that are important. And right now, top of mind is trying to get this year-round E15 bill passed. But there's also things that have to do with E85 and any other thing that has to do with ethanol or distiller's grain. But E15 is kind of the hot topic right now.
So a lot of advocacy behind that. And something you brought up with me just now was that even if it's passed, it doesn't make anybody have to use it. So there's still awareness that needs to be brought up.
Yeah. Right. In California, for example, right now they passed a year. They made E15 legal there. It was the last state that made it legal, which was good because there's sort of this thing among fuel marketers that if a fuel is weird somewhere, it's weird everywhere. And so, if California, it's not legal there, there's people that hesitate maybe because they're thinking, well, how come it's not legal everywhere? How come California is still doing it? So that's gone. But the regulations that California has to pass and different hoops they jump through before people can actually sell it, even though it was passed under an urgency statute, which meant they could sell it right away, there's still the California Air Resources Board, there's a fire marshal there, and there's all kinds of holdups. So that might not sell right away. And then even when we go to E15, once we do get that thing passed, and I'm confident we will someday get that passed, nobody has to sell any of it. It's an option. It's now you can sell E15. But what my part of the job is here with ACE is to go to different places and talk to marketers and explain to them why they should. And a lot of that is just math. It's understanding that you can have a fuel that more than 95% of the cars can use right now. You can put it in the existing equipment you have, and you can have a lower price than all your competitors. And if you're the first person who moves in your market, you might be able to take some business from them, and you'll be able to make a little bit more money. And so all these, all of those things fit together. If the legislation doesn't pass, then there's still this hesitation, like, why can't I sell it in the summer? And so there are people who just, most stations aren't selling it in the U.S., and it's because there's some kind of hang up on it. And if that year-round legislation passes, then it's just like every other fuel. And then people will look at it and say, well, wait a minute, this one is less, and I can sell it to pretty much everybody. Why wouldn't I do that? So there's that. And then the other thing that I'm involved in, too, is I'm with the U.S. Grains and Biofuels Council, and I'm on their ethanol A team. So there we're going to different places where they're either not using any ethanol or it's being used sparingly, and talking to people about E10 there, E5, anything it is, but just ethanol's new there. And it's sort of a throwback thing where you start getting questions about all these things that are sort of settled in the U.S. And so that's always kind of interesting. But right now exports are doing very well, and that's probably the thing saving the corn growers. The reason that we have some value in corn, not as much as they want or should have, but because there's still some exports, and that seems to be growing. They seem to be getting more comfortable with it in other countries, while we still have this sort of hesitancy in some parts of the U.S. But I guess that's why I have work.
Well, that was something I was about to touch on some of these other events. Right now, farmers are feeling the squeeze with all the different changes in trade policy, with diseases hitting some crops, with weather changes. But one of the positive points was being the growth of this fuel sector of both ethanol and the biofuel.
Well, and you've got, the refineries now making the renewable diesel. Basically, it's instead of using crude oil, they use vegetable oil of some sort, and it becomes diesel that's just like any other diesel. So that's great for the bean side of things. And in corn, it's more with ethanol. It has more to do with exports. You've got Canada that has grown a lot. I got to go up there with the Grains Grains and Biofuels Council, but it was Grains Council then. So got to go up to Calgary a few years ago, and the refiners that we talked to up there were just looking at it as another ingredient. There wasn't politics attached to it or anything. And it's something that they wanted to do to get cleaner air. They were trying to meet, the requirements of reducing their carbon intensity. And so ethanol made perfect sense to them. There wasn't arguing about electricity or anything. It's just, here's something we can use. And they have taken off. I mean, their volume, I think it's doubled in the past few years, maybe even more than that. But when ethanol is treated as just another part of the fuel supply, and there's not sort of tons of misinformation and politics that says if we do this, then we can't do that, which is kind of where electricity in some parts of the country or some parts of the world where they say, if we allow more ethanol, then that'll keep petroleum around longer, and we don't want to do that. So they just put their fingers in their ears and say, no, we don't want it. That seems to be going away because you can use the same vehicles. You can put it in now, and it's going to reduce your pollution. It's going to reduce your carbon intensity. And I think I got to go to India a few years ago, and that's what they were looking at. The people, they don't have the money to buy a fleet of electric cars. It's the most populated country in the world. But what they can do is go to 15% or 20%, and they just did that. I mean, it was the refiners, the automakers, everybody was on board, and they're just increasing their ethanol. Now, they have to use their own, their motor ethanol has to be made in India, but that means all of the other things that they use alcohol for in that country are now being backfilled with U.S. alcohol and U.S. ethanol. So it's, all over the world, people are looking at ethanol again when they started, and then they stopped because of food versus fuel concerns. But now they're looking at it again because it is a fuel that has proven, like in California, where they went from having all kinds of over ozone exceedance days or whatever they called their pollution days to where they almost have none now. And so I think that's where the popularity is coming from with exports. It's a good way to reduce your pollution without having to spend a ton of money or make people spend a ton of money for cars and whatever else they use it for.
So it's cleaner than the main option right now. And then also another feedback I've heard is while there was this push to go to electricity, it's really just not viable for larger machinery. Larger machinery has to run on fuel because the electricity, the battery packs that you need to power these big combines and things like that. So there's just parts of the fuel sector that can't really translate into electricity.
Well, I think it's fair to say, when people are talking about fuels, people who say all of the above very rarely practice all of the above. Because if it doesn't make sense to have batteries in planes or in large equipment, then just don't. And, it's one of those things that we say we don't need to have, ethanol doesn't need to be in everything, but it should be in the things that it can be in. And if it can help, then, you sometimes get this question. I remember, many years ago, a newspaper editorial board, and this guy said, well, if I get a mower and I power it with ethanol and it's only 1% cleaner, why should I use it? And I said, because it's 1% cleaner. There's just sort of, you got to get people out of that mentality of we're going to do this and it's going to replace everything. And I think that's probably where electric cars are right now, where people were saying it's just got to be all electric. And that was a strategy because I actually had people who were big electric vehicle supporters who said, well, if we talk about other things, then that'll just extend the glide path for petroleum. And I said, it probably needs to be extended. And, places like I live in South Dakota. My brother just bought an all-electric van and drove it from Minneapolis or St. Paul to Sioux Falls, and he had to stop and charge it, I think, 2 or 3 times. And it's just, there's places where it's practical. If you live in a city and you're driving local, I think an electric car would make a lot of sense. But if you live in rural America, it's tough to do. And on top of everything else, they cost a lot.
So we kind of probably need to move away from this idea of blanket applications as well and see where a technology meets the need and see where there's still need for existing technology and existing fuel sources.
Right, and I can't tell you the number of times over the past 25 years or as long as I've been doing this thing where people said, well, you can't replace all the gas with ethanol. And I said, I'm not saying we should. I mean, we should use it where we can use it and where it makes sense, and where you can use E85, use it. Where you can use E15, do that. And as mileage improves, if vehicles change, there's a tractor here that runs on E98, and that probably wouldn't have happened 5 or 10 years ago because there wasn't as big a gap between ethanol price and diesel price as there is now. And now you're looking at diesel prices that are a couple of bucks a gallon more than ethanol. And so it makes sense to maybe run those on E85 now, because even though you'll have less BTU per gallon, by the time you adjust for the different mileage or hours that you're running, you're going to save money. So
and then that leads me to the new tool that the ACE has put out, which is the fuel cost calculator.
Yeah, so that's more on the marketer side. When I was talking about maybe having to convince these stations that they should sell it because they can make more money, one of the things that we announced, I think in September of last year, about the time California was passing their E15 law, was this fuel cost calculator where they can go in and see what E15 costs. I mean, even if it's not sold in their area, they can put in an E10 price, which everybody has, and an E85 price, which mostly everybody has, and see how much difference there is in the price between E15 and E10, so that they'll know, okay, well, if I bought this now, I could blend it myself, and it would save us this much, using a blender pump. It would save us this much, and then we would be, 5 cents, 7 cents, 8 cents less than what my competitor's selling his E10 for. So maybe I can take some of their business. It's a higher octane fuel, so I maybe market that way. But that's when these marketers who see that E15 is legal, the two things that concern them is my equipment compatible? We find that everywhere you go. It's, all my stuff's going to break, because if they read it on the internet, there's so much misinformation. They're going to say, well, my pump's going to be destroyed, and it's not, and it never has, and that's what part of my job is to bring, that marketer perspective, saying, no, we've been selling it for 30 years, and we don't have that issue. But we have a flex check compatibility tool where they can plug in the names and numbers of all their equipment they use and find out that it's all compatible, or in some rare cases it's not. If they got really old tanks, they might not be compatible with E15. But that's out there, and then we just added this other tool, and we're in the process of updating the compatibility tool. So there's all those things, and that's on our website, which is flexfuelforward.com, which is designed, it hardly has our name on it, because we want it to not look like an ethanol thing, because then it's sort of, people might disqualify it, say, well, they're just making this up. And what we've got on there is marketers who've sold E15 and E85 and E30, talking about how they sold it, how they gained market share. And the interesting thing is we got to update that thing too, because I think three or four of the people that we feature in videos there made enough money that they retired now. So, that's great evidence for a reason you should be using ethanol.
Excellent testimony.
Yeah, but
you can retire.
Yeah, but that's what they need. And the reason that it's important to have it on a website is because about 60% of the stations in the country are owned by single station owners, and they work in the station, so they may not be able to go to a fuel marketer trade show or a workshop, but they can get online anytime. So those tools are there 24/7, and they can, if they hear about E15, and that's what happened when California passed theirs, we got a spike on the website. People who go into the calculator, going to the compatibility tool. So we want to make sure that when they finally do pass that E15 year round, that all those tools are up to date so that people can find them. And then we do a bunch of advertising in industry publications and online to make sure they know about it, because I'm sure we'll see a huge spike when that happens too. And hopefully that'll translate into some pretty quick upticks in E15 sales and more ethanol. And that's what we got to do. We know they've got the capacity to make a lot of ethanol here and grind a lot of corn. So in order for that to happen, we got to make sure there's a lot of places they can sell the ethanol.
Great. Anything else you want to add?
No, I just go back to that, fly-in that we have every year. We have station owners that come to that. We have farmers that come. We have people that run ethanol plants. And we have people that sell products to ethanol plants. And that's very effective, because when congressmen hear from someone from the American Coalition for Ethanol, they might have a bias saying, well, this is just somebody, talking head that comes in here. But when people who work in the industry every day come and talk. It's very effective. So if you go to ethanol.org and see about our fly-in, it's coming up pretty quick, but the more people we can get from different walks of life, the more effective it is.
Well, thank you so much for your time today.
You bet. Thanks. Nice to.
I'm Laura McNamara at the 2026 Commodity Classic.